Welcome to the No More Dead Friends podcast. I am your host, James Evans. We are not affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. If you are interested in meetings, please seek out a local 12-step meeting in your area. If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction and think that you might need treatment, please call 858-790-1937 to see what treatment options are available to you in your area. If you are having a medical emergency, please dial 911. All right, welcome to the first episode of the No More Dead Friends podcast. I'm your host, James Evans. Today we have on somebody who does a great job serving our recovery community out here in the Temecula Valley area, and somebody that I've grown much closer to in our recent service positions and W.
Hey, James, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. I'm glad that we can just kind of take a little break from the wild Monday we've already had so far today, and we got a lot going on with Aki and getting this package prepared. And so it's good to take a couple minutes to relax and just kind of have a conversation.
Yeah, bring it back to basics.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so really the main purpose of this podcast is to have people come on who have a story of their own personal recovery. And so really, I'd like to have you on here to share your story. And so I don't know if you want to just kind of kick things off and start a little bit kind of on, where things got started for you, where the process, began. I don't know how much you want to touch on before you got to the 12-step fellowships and stuff like that. But if you want to kind of take it away here for a couple minutes, and then I'll, ask you some questions along the way.
Yeah, sounds good. So I have been sober 7 years. I got sober at 21, and I always jokingly say, I never didn't get that full year of legal drinking, which I was very resentful about when I first got sober.
No, I love that.
But it was so indicative of, what drinking and using was already like in my life. 21 was not the start of everything, which I think it probably is for a lot of more normal folks. It was like the beginning of the end, really, for me.
Yeah, well, and for me too, I mean, I was 24. I mean, we're both class of 2016, and so I was very much in that same place of like, I'm still a child, but I think I'm an adult. And I definitely still want to party and have fun, and I'm resentful that I can't go do all the fun things. But I definitely got to get my life together if I'm gonna, do something with it.
It's funny because I didn't even realize that I had a problem with addiction. It was like, I remember growing up, right? Like, and you and I are the same age. You remember in the tabloids, like, Lindsay Lohan going to rehab a bunch of times and, circling in and out. And somehow it was like rehab and treatment it was like for Lindsay Lohan, somehow it wasn't an option for me even.
Yeah.
So I think the cognitive dissonance for me between my age and being able to connect and go, okay, I'm 21. I'm not living under a bridge. I'm not, drinking Everclear out of a brown paper bag. And I am a hope to die fucking alcoholic.
Yeah.
Like wrapping my mind around that was something that I think honestly took like the first year of my recovery to do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for me, it took me going in and out a few times, like I'm not the bottom of the barrel yet. But even though I'm not at the bottom of the barrel and I'm a lot smarter than my behavior is showing that I am, like trust me, everybody, I'm a lot smarter than my track record. It took that feeling of, I might not be the bottom of the barrel, but like I should be able to connect these dots and I can't.
Yeah.
So something's got to be there. Right. And so I'm glad that like, at 24 years old, I was able to really like have that thought, to where I could build off of that and go from there. When it's crazy, I remember being in treatment and telling my counselor the last time I was in treatment, like, hey, I've been getting loaded since I was 11 years old. If I don't give myself at least a 10-year period of sobriety, like I'm not going to know what it's like to live a normal life, and here I am, 7.5, coming up on 8 years, and it's gone by in a blink of an eye. I wouldn't change a thing about it, and I'm definitely not as far ahead as I thought I would be at this point. So still got a lot of work to do, which is a good thing.
It's so funny because you talked about knowing that who you were didn't match up to your actions.
Hmm.
And I think that's where I really had a very different experience. Like I really just believed I was a piece of shit. And I believed that like I could hold it together and I could convince everyone otherwise and I could present really well when I had to for increasingly shorter and shorter periods of time, as my addiction progressed. But I really just, I got to recovery and I started meeting other people who were sober. And I just thought, wow, you guys aren't pieces of shit. That's why you have what you have. But I'm a piece of shit. So maybe I'll get like 50% of what you have.
Yeah.
And it took years for me, you talked about service in the beginning of this, and it took years for me of like being in service to see other people reflect me back to me to go, oh, I'm not a piece of shit. Like I'm a decent human. I have some good parts and I have some shit that I definitely need to work on. I'm assuming we're cursing in this. I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
no, you're fine.
Okay. But that was a really long process for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and the whole time I've known you, it really wasn't until, the Falling in Love with the Steps workshop when I heard you, when we both spoke,
Mhm.
that I really got to hear you kind of, speak on your recovery. Until that point, like I had seen you, in service positions. I knew you were really about the deal, but I mean, you always seemed like the adult in the room, you know what I mean? You were always the one who kind of had it the most together. So you definitely, at least at that point, I mean, at that point, we probably both were what, at like 5 years, 4.5, 5 years, somewhere around there. So plenty of time to get the act together.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because, I think in some ways, even in my addiction, like I could pull that off really well. I could be, the adult in the room. And it worked really well because I could talk myself into, like, I had this whole track record in fucking active addiction of talking myself into jobs that I was wildly underqualified for. And I could get myself in the door, but I couldn't stay there because I burned it down so fast,
Yeah.
in recovery, there's been a balance for me of being the adult in the room, which I think is really just like super intense ADHD hyperfixation ability to jump in and mask. Um, and being able to balance like having fun. Like I didn't know, especially getting sober at 21, like I didn't know how to have fun. I was either like bottle service, nightclub, deep in fucking Hollywood, all the drugs I could ever ask for, fucking like hookers and blow, all that stereotypical shit. Or I was, at work, pretending that I was super responsible and I could be trusted with the cash register, which I could not. Um, and there was no in between. And then I came here, I got into recovery and I started to meet people who taught me, like, hey, like you can have fun without blowing your life up for 6 months at a time. I didn't
Yeah,
know
for
that.
sure. Well, and it really took me a few years. I mean, don't get me wrong, like I did the sober living deal. I had fun in rehab. I had fun every step of the way, but like recovery related stuff was always so serious to me that it wasn't until like a few years into this deal when I like was able to go, okay, like, my life's been saved. I can start having some fun again. I really had to like walk that line of everything had to be so serious for so long because I had done nothing but partied and how to have a good time for all those years. That once I was sober and I finally was no longer drowning, it was kind of uncomfortable to like get loose for a little bit and not have to worry about things. So
Well, and I think like I remember seeing a therapist early on in my sobriety, and she said, how are you going to go from the level of chaos that you're used to a life in recovery? And I think I had 9 months sober when I applied for grad school. And then I got into grad school and I started working like inpatient psych. So highest acuity, highest chaos level that I could find. And so I think it's been funny because it's like that little chaos gremlin is still there that needs something. But it gets fed in different ways today. And that's something that I didn't expect and I didn't understand when I first got sober.
For sure. And I have that too with what I do, doing admissions and business development for a treatment center. Like my phone can ring at any time, and the next 2 hours of my life, I'm strapped to it and I'm working, and for me not needing to, I don't have to necessarily I don't punch a clock at, 9 a.m. Monday through Friday, and so I definitely still have that little bit of chaos, but there's so much balance in it for me today. Um, that wasn't anything I ever had in the past, So I know you had mentioned some partying up in Hollywood. I know you from out here in the Temecula Valley area. So were you up there in before you moved out this way, or how are your connections up there?
Yeah, I was. So I started partying. I was 15 and I started dating a 21-year-old, which was very convenient. Um, I hear people share about like, oh, I had to steal liquor and I just dated my connection. Like that
Yeah.
was how it
Smart.
worked for me. Um, and I grew up in LA County and I sort of accidentally fell in with a crew that was just moving really fast. And I went to my first party in the Hollywood Hills. It's actually a really funny story. I had asked my ex, I'm 15 years old. I get invited to this party. It's in the Hollywood Hills. It's the fucking house next to Will Ferrell's house. And I asked my ex, I was like, well, what do I wear? And she goes, oh, wear a dress. And I'm like, okay. So I pull out this like gorgeous, flowy, like flower print, free people dress, like the nicest thing I own. And I roll up to this party in the hills, and they're all these, 20 something girls with huge lips and bleach blonde hair and the skin tight mini dress and the 6-inch heels. And I just remember walking in and going, I am in a different world. And I did not get the memo. And, when you're 15 and you have a shitty childhood and you just want to escape, you think you won the lottery. It's
Oh,
like,
for
okay,
sure.
like, what is this? Tell me where to go and how to fit in and let's fucking go. And so, I got the fake ID and we went to all the bars and I learned how to, talk any door guy into letting me in. And um some of the girls that we were partying with were, they were in that like unofficial sugar baby crowd where it was really
Hmm.
her boyfriend, but he was also like 45 fucking years old.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was just like, that was the scene, like there was bottle service everywhere we went and we never had to wait in line. And I remember like there was one house we used to go to and the kid who owned the house was some heir to some art gallery, something. I saw randomly in the news a couple of years ago, he ended up ODing in the house. And there was just an unlimited supply of drugs. Like
Yeah.
whatever he wanted, he would go in the other room and he'd get it. We never ran out, and the connection was always there whenever he wanted him. So it was just like I didn't get the chance to, like start sneaking beers at my friend's house down the street. Like it was just 0 to 60 unhinged chaos so
Yeah,
fast.
such a different environment too from being out here. I'm sober here today, but these were really my stomping grounds, and so it was just definitely I mean we had everything we wanted, but it's just definitely a much different style.
Yeah.
So how long did that really last up there? Did you get sober up there too, or did you not get sober until you moved down this way, or what's the story behind that?
Yeah, so I got sober out there. I was running, that was my life. And I could hold it together maybe for a couple days during the week, and Thursday through Sunday it was on. Um, and then I ended up, this is your podcast, but I'll end up getting real nitty gritty. I ended up getting pregnant, and I got pregnant. um, I got pregnant by a porn star, since there's some anonymity in this podcast.
Yeah.
And, he was much, much older. And it was like all of a sudden my world just came sliding to a halt, because the story that I told myself is, well, I don't have kids. I don't have a family. I don't have, like, no one's being hurt by what I'm doing. So there's
Yeah.
no reason that I shouldn't drink and get loaded the way I drink and get loaded.
We all thought that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We all thought that.
And that was the end of the delusion for me. And like you've heard my story. I OD'd on my 21st birthday. Like that wasn't the end of the delusion for me. But
Mhm.
that, when I found out I was pregnant, that was the first moment in my life where I realized that something greater than me was at stake. Like I was impacting someone else. Um, and it was an incredibly painful experience. I did not end up having that baby. Um, and I was finally in enough pain where I just kind of like prayed to the universe. I didn't know what I was praying to. And I was just like, help me. Like, I don't know what's wrong. I can't do this anymore. I can't live this life. I've tried to kill myself. That didn't work. I'm trying to, just get loaded and outrun the pain. That's not working anymore. Um, and I I ended up meeting someone who was sober like a week later. And she was like, "Hey, and let me take you out to lunch and talk to you about recovery." And then I ended up moving out to closer to this area for grad school when I had about a year. Did grad school, fell in love, thought I met the one, thought I was going to have my white picket fence, and then that brought me out to this area. And then when I was in this area, um, it fell apart pretty quickly. My ex and I had moved in together February of 2020. Obviously, March of 2020 happened.
Yep.
Things changed pretty fast.
So quick.
Um, and it was like a year later, and I just realized, like I have a little bit of time sober under my belt, and I'm living this super toxic, chaotic life. And once again, I'm trying to pretend that everything's fine and I'm okay, and I'm not. And so I ended up, and this was, I think, like right after I had met you guys. I think I met you guys like one time on Zoom. And then a little bit after that, I ended up packing a bag and I like went back to our house, threw some shit in a duffel bag, booked an Airbnb, and was like, all right, we're starting over. And that was really when I met you and met a lot of our friends because I was just, once again, like stone cold sober, but completely broken because of my own decision making.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I mean, luckily you stayed sober through the process. I know for me, I when I had gotten to kind of that I was at that jumping off point, where I was sober and I couldn't see life with recovery or without it. And I didn't do any work. I got to that point because I didn't do any work. So obviously, like I got loaded again. It took me, a good 6, 7 months before I made it back to the rooms and before I finally got sober and stayed sober. But so it's impressive when I see people kind of go through that kind of stuff and they do the work. It just shows that like we can go through anything as long as we do what we're supposed to do in this program and we stay sober. We can walk through these difficult things in life and then come out on the other end of it, living through and staying sober that experience. And I just wanted to say too, it's such a trip to me. You had talked about, that crying out to the universe and not even realizing what you were praying to or whatever. It's such a trip to me how like, when people talk about how like, okay, well, I might like ask God to get me out of this situation or like the help me kind of
Yeah.
prayers. But when we hit that place where there's just like there's nothing left and there's just that desperation and it's just like something, please help me, that genuine, honest surrender and cry for help, like it almost always gets answered. I've just time and time again, I've heard people tell their story. And when they have that moment like that, where they just like reach out to the universe for help, whatever your interpretation of that may be, things just fall into place after that. And that was my experience too. When I had relapsed and I'd gone back and forth and I'd gone back and forth. And, when I finally was done, I tried going to like this outpatient, the outpatient for the rehab that I had went to. And they're like, dude, you need to like go to detox and go to residential. And I was like, no, I got like this, I got this, I got this. I had all these things going on. I was like, I could just do this an outpatient. And they're like, all right. So I started, and then I realized after I got stayed sober for a couple weeks, like, yo, I need like inpatient. Like I that was not my best thinking that thinking I could just do this on outpatient, and when your hands are tied to insurance, you got to prove that the outpatient's not working. So like really my last like time getting loaded, like it wasn't anything that like I really wanted to do. It was like, hey, I want to go to detox. I want to go to residential. I want to like, go to treatment. That was like for me in my experience where I was at, because I was like, dude, I fucked up. Thinking once again, I outsmarted this thing. And so that last time I was just like, I didn't want to like, get loaded at all. Of course I did, I did more meth than somebody who's just trying to fail a drug test needs to do, right? And so it was that, and then with the drinking, and I'd been up for a few days, and I just remember like going into treatment that last time, and I just like it just gives me the chills, like thinking back, it just being so done and so just like ready, like my mentality from the beginning, when I got sober this time was, I don't know what life's going to look like, and I don't care. It's just as long as it's not what I got. I've lived long enough doing what I was doing, getting what I was getting. Yeah, I've lived it. I know, and I'm done with that. I'm ready to try something different. And that it was like that true surrender, of like, hey, just whatever this looks like, whatever the trade-off is, like I'm not in the results game anymore. I'm not worried what it looks like. I just know I'm done with this life. Like, help me. And it was just that genuine, like, help me get through this and live my life sober, and I'll do what I got to do. And it was just God shot after God shot all the way down the line to where I am today. So, and I see that in other people, and I heard that in your story there. So, and then so I didn't even realize that. So it was like 2020 when you moved out this way, right? So, and that was right actually when, so for Kristen and I, we had both been we had both been on the committee for a bit, and then March of 2020, because she was working down in San Diego, at Restore, at the treatment center that I'm at, today still, she was working there. So February 2020 is when we moved there. And I stayed on the committee and she didn't. But so we moved down there February 2020, and then fast forward, I think it was 3 weeks later, the world shut down, And so for me, I was in San Diego to where like there was a lot of like park meetings, beach meetings. There was a ton of that down there. Was it really like that up here as well too? Were there like a lot of sports park meetings, or was it mainly like Zoom for you, or like what did that look like?
I don't know because I had just moved here. So when everything shut down, where I got sober, like everyone was getting together on Zoom. And so I just hopped on Zoom with all the people that I knew from back home. And I was like, great, I get to see all these familiar faces. I don't have to get to know any new people. So I didn't really start like poking my head out and seeing what the recovery scene was like out here until it was probably like June of 2021. Yeah,
Okay.
May of 2021. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and
Yeah.
by that time we were back here. Yeah,
Yeah.
'cause we moved down there for that year, and then we got married in 2021. And so we came back up here when we got married.
Yeah.
Um, but and then so, and speaking of marriage, are you married or are you engaged? What's going on there? I know that the promises seem to be coming true in your life. You want to touch on that a little bit?
I met her. It was funny. I met her actually through our friend Maya. They grew up
Okay.
together and they were best friends. And so she was down here visiting our mutual friend. And, I was being a flirt and it was, super casual. She lives up in Washington. I live here. It's never going to be a thing. And I guess the joke was on me because we're getting married in September.
Love that. That's so
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
So great. And she moved down here?
Yeah, she's been
Yeah.
here almost a year now.
Nice.
And she's, a little bit of culture shock, but she's getting used to it. And Yeah.
Yeah, Washington's definitely very different. Washington's more my pace up there. Me and Kristen both we went there in it was either June or July. I believe it was July on our honeymoon, and it was I think it was like 100, 105 in Murrieta, and we were up there, and it was like overcast and hoodie weather in July, and me and Kristen were like, we thought we died and went to heaven. Seriously, it was just amazing.
It's,
Um,
that's kind of how I feel about this area is, especially growing up in the LA area and running around LA and doing all that, being out in the suburbs is heaven. People are like, oh, we don't have good food. We don't have, I'm like, we have fucking cul-de-sacs. This is
yeah,
great. So like,
yeah. No, and after living in San Diego and in Orange County, I definitely wish that we had some better food options, some stuff that was not just like, simple chains and stuff, but the trade-off of being here, I think is worth it for sure because we're an hour from everything. We're so centralized.
yeah,
It's awesome. And we got everything. I mean, we're so blessed with the recovery community out here. I mean, whatever 12-step group you're looking at, there are so many meetings and meeting halls and just every day of the week there's whether it's the noons, the 6 p.m.s, the and all that stuff. There's just so much resources, so many people who are out here just doing the deal, staying sober and helping people and giving back. And even the treatment centers here in this area too, they're all well respected and in solid programs.
yeah, which is so rare. I mean, I went through, it wasn't until I started, meeting more people and working with people in recovery that I found out about, the profit motive. And I've heard some horror stories from folks I've worked with. It's just wild. It's like, there are probably few populations that are more at risk to exploitation, and the
Mhm.
exploitation for folks who are struggling with substance use is through the roof. It's ridiculous.
For sure. And and I've been in the industry now for 4.5, coming up on 5 years, and it's like, for the most part, I mean, even like, because there's the nonprofit facilities, there's for-profit facilities. 99% of the for-profit facilities that I've toured with and checked out, I mean, even like I'm a hardcore like 12-step dude who, I never wanted to work in treatment. I really didn't. And it wasn't until my wife was working at a place that resembled the place that I went to so much that like it really like it made sense to me for once
Yeah.
because it just reminded me of like where I got sober. And there's so many people in the industry doing the right thing. But there's definitely the very few places where, the horror stories come from. And the good thing is all the programs that are really doing the deal, which is for the most part it's the vast majority of the programs. There's guys like me, there's women who think the same way, who are really about it, who do the next right thing, are here to serve people. At the end of the day, like that's who's really at the forefront of the industry. But it's been tainted for sure because there's some people who just did not have the right intentions. And they saw dollar signs. I mean, there's so many of us are we ex
Con.
drug dealers, ex cons, people who just did not have the right way of living, and they see a way to make money quick, and they think that's going to be their golden ticket, and people get hurt in the process. It's that same mentality of I'm not hurting anybody, and you can rationalize it all you want, but unless you're doing the from root to fruit, just doing it ethically, doing it the right way, like
Yeah.
those places, they kind of take care of themselves. They're there for a short period of time. It doesn't take long for us to talk and to tell each other kind of who to look out for and what to watch for. So I really, I see the stigma that kind of surrounds the industry with thinking that a lot of the places do it for the wrong reason, but I really do see, the opposite more than I see that.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good because, you know, it. it hit me for a second when you introduced, the name of your podcast, and I know you've dropped a merchandise line too.
Hmm.
It's funny and the designs are cool and like it's attention grabbing and it's great, but like the reality is like we all have dead friends of this
Hmm.
disease, and that just really like it knocks you back every time that you really think about the reality of it.
100%. Yeah, and it's like I used in my old big book, I used to keep a list on to two of the white pages, couple of the white pages of like people I knew and then people in the program. And by like year 4 in the program, like I ran out of space, and like it's just the numbers are just
Yeah.
ridiculous. And especially since like, from right around like a little after, but right around like when we got sober, like that's when like the fentanyl numbers just started skyrocketing.
Yeah.
So and like at a young age, I had we lost one of the friends in our community to like Xanax and alcohol, and then shortly after through the years, like we lost a couple friends to heroin. One was like a big one in the friends group to heroin. And even like drunk driving stuff, it was like it was happening, but it was very like, these were isolated incidences. And then it was like once the fentanyl stuff really started I mean, since 2020, it's
Yeah.
like
It's been another world.
it's been
I,
a whole nother world.
I think about it all the time. Like, some of it just feels like a numbers game. The fact that, I got sober in 2016 before that, like, I've never had a White Claw. You know what I mean? But I also never had to worry about like fentanyl being in my shit.
Hmm.
And I think about it now, like there was a margin for error when you and I were out there, right? Like, you could buy something and it was laced or it was bad, and like you were gonna have a bad couple hours or a bad couple days. But you weren't gonna die, unless you were like shooting heroin, like there was a margin for error. And now there's just not. And I have a couple people who have actually lost kids, young kids, like 16, 17,
Hmm.
because they were at a party and they took a pill. And these aren't kids who were like struggling with addiction for years. These are kids who were, normal teenage experimenting. What's that? Do
Hmm.
I like it? Can I try it? And they just didn't make it out the other side.
Yeah, which is so insane to think about. And I mean, at least for the most part, like the people buying the pressed pills with the fentanyl, they know what they're buying, but when it's in all the other stuff, that's what I think is, you know, where it's so because it's not anybody who's looking for that. And I swear I've been saying this for years, since I was a drug dealer, and I know how lazy drug dealers are. I swear that like, and I could be totally wrong, right? I'm the first one to admit that I always can be wrong. I'm never gonna try and act like I'm the smartest person in the room, right? But I swear that it like so much of like it being in cocaine or it being in other things, like if it ends up in ketamine or even in weed, like it has to be lazy drug dealers that don't clean their scale because I was a lazy drug dealer who never cleaned my scale. And if you bought cocaine from me, a lot of times there was little weed flakes in it because I did not clean my scale, And just with the fentanyl, just like such a small amount of that residue
Yeah.
is enough to take people out, And like I said, I could be blatantly so wrong. But that just is what like I've been saying. I just been swearing by it. I just picture it in my head, because I don't understand like the point of putting it in cocaine or in anything else, and it's just it's so wild to me. And I mean, even like, back in our day, like we knew like you don't touch heroin.
Yeah.
It was like the line in the sand, the people who do heroin die, right? That's just what we kind of like that era of partying. You just like you knew that, right? Like Kurt Cobain died, right? And then that's like the poster child for don't do heroin, and even the people who were doing heroin, like they knew how much was in a cap, right? They
Yeah.
knew they could, but now with the fentanyl being in it, it's not like that. Like every time is such a roll of the dice. It's just so not worth it. Um,
And that's been something that's really interesting for me too, because I think we always talk about like not doing this in recovery, but I think to some degree, for most people, there's this sense that the longer they stay clean and sober, the more space they get from that level of risk.
mhm.
for me, it's like I've watched things change so much in the last 7 years that I feel like, wow, I better take better care of my sobriety now than I did when I first got sober because the stakes are even higher, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I love cocaine. And my understanding is like there is a lot of fentanyl in cocaine nowadays.
Hmm.
So, this idea of like, oh, I could relapse and make it back or, figure it, it's like, I just don't have that sense. It just feels like this might be the only shot I've got at staying sober.
Yeah. Well, and did you from when you entered the rooms, like did you have a period of relapse there, or are you somebody who kind of got it from the beginning, or?
Yeah, I've only ever had one sobriety date. And I don't know, there are a lot of things I could attribute it to. I mean, I had an aunt with long-term sobriety when I came in, so I believed that recovery was possible. I knew it could happen. But I also got really lucky because I kind of just fell in with this like group of people who were really hardcore about recovery. And it was like, you do X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things that, I'd love to be able to sit back and say, like, oh, well, God kept me sober. Sure, I have a higher power that has a part in all this, but a lot of it was just I really wanted to be liked. So when
Mhm.
you guys told me to do something, I did it because I wanted you to like me.
Yeah, there you go.
And that worked in my favor. So yeah, I've only had the one sobriety date. I've never been someone who's like, oh, I'm gonna, go off and try things on my own. Like there have been certain suggestions that were made to me um that I like I've always followed my whole time in these past 7 years.
Mhm.
And who knows what the next 7 years are gonna hold. But I've learned that kind of something you talked about a minute ago. I've learned that there's certain things that if I do them, my odds of being able to stay sober through really hard shit dramatically increase.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and the reason why I asked that too is because you had mentioned like, when people, they come back, and it's so easy to come back. Like that was why when I relapsed, like I stayed out for a while because I had relapsed and I came straight back and like nobody was mad at me. Nobody was talking shit. Like there's no like we don't shoot. I mean, we don't shoot our wounded in the program. So it's like, it was like, hey, that was easy. And I see how like people fall into that revolving door of thinking it's always going to be there for them, but as we've been saying though, it's like these days, the risk is just so high that for me, because it's like, what am I going to do? Just drink? Like I'd be fine with that for like a week. And then it's like,
Right.
I want to put something in my face, And so, and don't get me wrong. Like I had my own struggles with drinking more so than a lot of other drugs. But still that it always had to be paired with something,
Yeah.
So, it would not last very long. But awesome. I really appreciate your time today. Like I said, I was so glad we can, take a few minutes because we've had a hectic couple weeks and I feel like we're gonna much like getting to treatment this last time where I felt like I was crossing the finish line. After this weekend, we'll have the dust will settle and life can find a little bit more balance once we won't be having to comb through contracts and calling back and forth with
Yeah.
different people and
Yeah.
all that wild stuff. So I'm very excited for this weekend. We're gonna have a lot of fun
Yeah.
over there at Aki, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Good to talk to you, James.
All right, thank you so much, Ann. Thank you for listening to the No More Dead Friends podcast. I'm your host, James Evans. We are not affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. If you are interested in meetings, please seek out a local 12-step meeting in your area. If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction and think that you might need treatment, please call 858-790-1937 to see what treatment options are available to you in your area. If you are having a medical emergency, please dial 911. For information about our clothing line, please go to nomoredeadfriends.etsy.com. The No More Dead Friends podcast is made for educational, promotional, and entertainment purposes. It is essential to understand that the topics discussed in this podcast are based on general knowledge and are not to be considered as professional treatment advice. Please consult with qualified medical professionals before making any decisions or taking any actions based on the information in this podcast.